I never thought I'd be the mother who wasn't invited to her own son's wedding. The ivory invitation fragment lay on my kitchen counter like a slap across 32 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and proud moments. Devon's elegant script announced his marriage to Astrid Wellingham, but my name appeared nowhere, not even as an afterthought. Just, Mr. and Mrs. Colin Mistral request the honor of your presence. Colin, the man who raised him but never truly loved either of us. The man whose name Devon still carries, believing lies I was too afraid to correct. But what if Devon knew the truth about his real father? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning after I found the wedding invitation fragment, I stood in my flower shop at dawn, arranging white roses for Mrs. Henderson's anniversary bouquet. Meadoridge Bay was still wrapped in ocean mist, and the familiar scent of salt air drifted through my shop's open windows. This place had been my sanctuary for 15 years, ever since my divorce from Colin. Every stem I cut, every arrangement I created had helped me rebuild myself piece by piece. I was 68 years old, and I thought I understood the shape of my life. I had my work, my small cottage 3 blocks from the shore, and my relationship with my daughter Nina, who lived 2 hours away in Portland. Devon had been drifting away for years, but I'd convinced myself it was natural. Young men needed to establish their independence. I'd told myself his coldness was temporary, that marriage would soften him, make him realize the family mattered. But the invitation fragment told a different story. Someone had torn it deliberately before it reached me, leaving only enough to hurt. The elegant cardstock bore watermarks of exclusion. Mr. and Mrs. Colin Mistral request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Devon James Mistral, to Miss Astrid Charlotte Wellingham, their son. As if I'd never existed, I set down my garden shears and walked to the back office, where I kept my jewelry box hidden behind shipping invoices. Inside, pressed between tissue paper, lay a dried rose from 1973. I was 17 then, working the night shift at the Seahorse Motel, saving money to escape my mother's boyfriend and his wandering hands. That's when Lucian walked into my life. He was 22, a jazz musician traveling the coast with his guitar and dreams of recording an album. Dark hair that curled at his collar, eyes the color of storm clouds, hands that could coax magic from 6 strings. He stayed at the motel for 3 weeks, and I fell in love with the way he hummed while making coffee, the way he listened to my fears about the future, the way he made me believe I was worth more than survival. The night before he left for a recording session in Los Angeles, he gave me a white rose from the motel's struggling garden for Eleanor. He said, "The most beautiful girl I've ever known." He promised to come back for me. He promised we'd travel together, make music together, build something real. But by the time he returned 2 months later, I was gone. And I was pregnant. I ran because I was terrified. 17, pregnant, with no family support, and no idea how to reach him in Los Angeles. I spent Devon's first years in a women's shelter in Portland, working whatever jobs I could find, trying to be both mother and father, to a child who deserved better than my fear and inexperience. When Devon was 3, I met Colin at a community college where I was taking night classes in business. He was stable, respectable, and willing to marry a young single mother. I thought I was giving Devon a father, a chance at a normal life. I told Colin that Devon's father had died in a car accident, and when Devon was old enough to ask questions, that's the story we told him too. It seemed kinder than the truth, that I'd been too frightened and ashamed to give Lucien the chance. To choose us now, holding that pressed rose. I wondered if kindness and cowardice looked the same from the outside. Colin had legally adopted Devon when we married, giving him his surname and claiming him as his son. For 26 years, Devon believed Colin was his biological father. The marriage lasted 15 years before Colin's controlling nature and emotional distance drove me to finally file for divorce. But by then, Devon was 18 and angry with me for breaking up the family. He chose to live with Colin during his senior year of high school, and our relationship never recovered. Colin had always been better at providing material things. The right clothes, the right schools, the right connections. I offered love and home-cooked meals, but Devon seemed to associate me with struggle and emotional messiness. Colin represented success and stability. My phone buzzed, interrupting my memories. A text from my daughter Nina. "Mom, are you okay? I heard about the wedding." I stared at the message, my hands shaking slightly. Nina was 30, born during my marriage to Colin, and she'd always been my ally. Unlike Devon, she saw through Colin's polished exterior to the manipulative man underneath. She'd been the one to encourage me to leave him, even though it meant financial hardship for both of us. I typed back, "How did you hear?" Astrid posted engagement photos on Instagram. The caption mentioned "close family only" for the ceremony. "I'm sorry, Mom. Close family only." The phrase stung like salt in a fresh wound. How had I become distant family to the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through fevers, cheered through baseball games and graduation ceremonies? When had my love become inconvenient? I closed the jewelry box and returned to the front of the shop. Outside, Meadoridge Bay was waking up. Early morning joggers passed by the window, and Mrs. Chen from the bakery next door was arranging fresh croissants in her display case. This small coastal town had embraced me when I needed a fresh start after my divorce. But suddenly, it felt like a place where mothers could be discarded without anyone noticing. The bell above my door chimed, and my best friend Marlo entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee from Chen's bakery. Lo had moved to Meadoridge Bay around the same time I did, escaping corporate burnout in San Francisco. She was 5 years younger than me, with silver-streaked auburn hair and a sharp wit that could cut through pretense like a knife through butter. "You look like hell," she said, handing me a coffee. "And before you say you're fine, I already heard about the wedding invitation situation. Small town, big mouths." I accepted the coffee gratefully. Lo had a gift for appearing exactly when I needed her most. "Who told you?" "Jenny at the post office. Apparently someone's been intercepting your mail. She noticed because she remembered sorting a fancy envelope with your name on it last week. But then it never made it to your box." Lo settled into the wooden chair I kept by the counter for chatty customers. "Want to tell me why your son thinks you don't deserve to see him get married?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and impossible to ignore. I'd never told anyone about Lucian, not even Lo. Some secrets feel too complicated to share, too tangled in shame and regret to untangle for someone else's understanding. But sitting in my flower shop, surrounded by the beauty I'd created from broken soil, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was seeing my name erased from Devon's most important day. Maybe it was realizing that my silence had protected everyone, except the people I'd meant to shield. Maybe it was simply being 68 years old, and tired of carrying secrets that had grown heavier with each passing year, because Devon doesn't know who his real father is, I said quietly. Lo set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Excuse me." So I told her everything. About Lucian and the rose and the pregnancy that sent me running. About Colin and the lies that seemed easier. than the truth. About watching Devon grow up believing a story that protected my pride but may have cost him his authentic history. When I finished, Lo was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Eleanor, honey, you know you can't let this stand, right? You can't let him get married believing Colin is his father. It's too late. The wedding is next weekend. Then you have a week to find this Lucian and tell Devon the truth." The idea was terrifying and impossible and absolutely necessary all at once. I don't even know if Lucian is still alive. It's been 32 years. Lo pulled out her phone. What was his full name? Lucien Rayner. Her fingers flew across the screen. Musician, jazz guitarist, born 1951. Here he is. Lucien Rayner, retired high school music teacher, lives in Sunset Harbor. She looked up at me triumphantly. That's 20 miles from here. 20 miles. After 32 years of wondering, Lucian was 20 miles away. The coincidence felt like destiny or cosmic irony. I couldn't decide which. I can't just show up at his door, I protested. Why not? You have information he deserves to know. He has a son who's getting married next weekend. The weight of that truth settled over me like a heavy coat. Lucian had a son who played guitar like his father, who had his father's storm cloud eyes, who was about to commit his life to someone without knowing half of who he was. What if he hates me for keeping this from him? Lo reached across the counter and took my hand. Eleanor, what if he doesn't? What if he's been wondering about you all these years, too? What if Devon needs to know where his musical talent comes from? Why he hums unconsciously when he's nervous? Why he's never felt completely at home in Colin's world? I thought about Devon as a little boy, always drawn to music despite Colin's insistence that it was impractical. How he'd saved his allowance to buy a guitar when he was 12. How Colin had hidden it and told him real men focused on careers that paid well. How Devon had complied on the surface but never lost his love for melody. The wedding is at the Cliffside Event Center, I said slowly. Next Saturday at 4 o'clock. Then you have 6 days to track down Lucian and figure out what you want to say to your son. And if Devon never forgives me for lying to him his whole life, Lo squeezed my hand. Then at least you'll know you finally told the truth. Sometimes that's all we can do. Clean up our own side of the street and hope the people we love can find their way to forgiveness. As she left to open her pottery studio across the street, I stood alone among my flowers, contemplating the kind of courage required to unbury the past. The pressed rose lay on the counter between us, a fragile reminder that some loves are worth the risk of resurrection. Outside, Meadoridge Bay continued its gentle morning rhythm, unaware that one woman's world was about to crack open and rearrange itself around a truth 32 years in the making. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office with sweaty palms and a story I'd rehearsed 12 times. I needed Devon's original birth certificate, the one filed before Colin's adoption. Papers changed everything. The clerk, a kind woman named Patricia, who remembered me from my volunteer work at the library, didn't ask many questions when I explained I was updating family documents. The birth certificate arrived in a manila envelope that felt heavier than paper should. I sat in my car in the parking lot, engine running, air conditioning blasting, staring at the envelope like it might explode. When I finally opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Baby boy Mistral, born August 15th, 1991. Mother, Eleanor Rose. Mistral, father. Unknown, unknown. That single word contained the entire architecture of my cowardice. I could have written Lucien's name, I could have given Devon the gift of his father's identity from the very beginning. Instead, I'd chosen the safety of ambiguity, and that choice had rippled through 32 years of my son's life. I drove home slowly, taking the coastal route past the lighthouse where I used to bring Devon and Nina when they were small. The memories felt different now, shadowed by the knowledge of what I'd withheld. Every bedtime story, every school pickup, every proud moment at his high school graduation, all of it built on a foundation of partial truth. At home, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table with the birth certificate spread before me. My cottage was small but filled with things that mattered. Nina's childhood artwork framed on the walls, photos of Devon from before our relationship grew cold, books I'd collected over the years, plants that thrived under my careful attention. This was the life I'd built after choosing safety over love, stability over authenticity. But safety had cost me my son anyway. I pulled out my laptop and searched for Lucian Rayner again, this time looking beyond basic information. His high school's website listed him as the former head of the music department, retired 3 years ago after a distinguished career. There were photos from concerts and award ceremonies. Still handsome at 71, still carrying himself with the quiet confidence I remembered. In one photo, he was conducting a jazz ensemble, his hands moving with the same grace that had once strummed lullabies for me in that motel room. My phone rang, startling me from my research. Nina's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "I wasn't supposed to know about the wedding. Devon asked me not to tell you." The words hit like a physical blow. "He specifically asked you to keep it secret." "Not just me. He sent messages to everyone in the family. He said you'd been struggling with emotional stability since the divorce, and that having you there might create drama that would ruin Astrid's special day." I gripped the phone tighter. "Emotional instability? It's bullshit, Mom. We all know it's bullshit. But Devon, he's different now. Ever since he started dating Astrid, it's like he's trying to erase anything that doesn't fit their perfect image. You know her family has political connections, right? Her father's running for state senate." "I didn't know that." "Yeah, and Astrid's been pretty vocal about wanting a clean wedding with no family complications. I think she sees you as messy because you divorced Colin and because you work with your hands instead of having some prestigious career." The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. My son hadn't just grown distant. He'd been influenced to see me as an embarrassment. "Nina, there's something I need to tell you about Devon's father." I told her everything, just as I'd told Lo that morning. Nina listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Jesus, Mom," she finally said. "Devon has a whole other family history he doesn't even know about." "I was scared," I said. "When you're 17 and pregnant with no support system, you make choices that seem like survival at the time. I'm not judging you for being scared. I'm judging you for letting Devon think Colin is his biological father for 32 years. Do you know how many times he's talked about inheriting Colin's practical nature and business sense? He's been trying to live up to traits that aren't even in his DNA." Her words stung because they were true. Devon had spent his adult life trying to emulate a man who wasn't his father, suppressing the artistic inclinations that were his true inheritance. "What should I do?" "You should tell him before the wedding." "And Mom?" Nina's voice grew gentle. "You should probably tell this Lucian guy first. He deserves to know he has a son." After we hung up, I sat with the birth certificate and my laptop, contemplating the enormity of what I was considering. Disrupting a wedding. revealing a 32-year-old secret, potentially destroying the carefully constructed life my son had built. But what kind of life was built on lies? And what kind of mother was I if I let him make the most important commitment of his life without knowing who he really was? I found Lucien's address through public records. He lived on Harbor View Drive in Sunset Harbor, in a neighborhood I remembered from my early days in Maine. Older homes with character, many of them occupied by retirees who'd been drawn to the coast for its beauty and peace. Before I could lose my nerve, I wrote him a letter. Dear Lucien, you probably don't remember me, but we knew each other in 1973 at the Seahorse Motel in Meadow Ridge Bay. My name was Eleanor Rose then, and I was 17. You stayed for 3 weeks in July, and we spent time together before you left for Los Angeles. I need to tell you something I should have told you 32 years ago. I was pregnant when you left, and I was too scared and young to know how to reach you. Our son, Devon, was born on August 15th, 1991. He's getting married next Saturday, and he doesn't know you exist. I understand if you're angry with me for keeping this from you. I understand if you want nothing to do with either of us, but I thought you deserved to know, and I thought Devon deserved the chance to know his real father before he starts a family of his own. If you're willing to meet, my phone number is 207-55-0147. I work at Meadow Ridge Flowers on Main Street, and I live at 42 Cottage Lane. I'm sorry I waited so long to find the courage to tell you the truth. Eleanor. I printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and drove to Sunset Harbor before I could change my mind. Lucien's house was a blue Victorian with white trim, surrounded by a garden that showed careful attention. Wind chimes hung from the front porch, and I could see a piano through the front window. I left the letter in his mailbox like a message in a bottle, hoping it would reach the right shore. The drive home felt like floating. I'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone, and the terror was equal to the relief. For 32 years, I'd carried this secret alone. Now, for better or worse, it belonged to the world. At home, I called Lo and told her what I'd done. How do you feel? She asked, like I'm either about to save my relationship with my son or destroy it completely. Either way, you're being honest for the first time in 32 years. That's got to count for something. That night, I lay awake thinking about Devon as a baby, how he used to fall asleep to my humming, how he'd reach for my face with tiny hands when I sang to him. I thought about Lucien and the music we'd made together, not just with his guitar, but with our voices harmonizing in that small motel room. I wondered if Devon had inherited that gift, if he hummed the same unconscious melodies when he thought no one was listening. I wondered if I was about to give him back a piece of himself he'd never known was missing. Outside my bedroom window, the ocean whispered against the shore, keeping time like a metronome, marking the hours until my letter would be discovered, and my carefully guarded truth would finally find its voice. Lucien called me the next morning while I was arranging sunflowers for the Methodist Church's Wednesday service. My hands were dirt-stained, and I nearly dropped the phone when I saw the unfamiliar number on the screen. Eleanor. His voice was deeper than I remembered, weathered by years, but unmistakably his. It's Lucien. I got your letter. My heart hammered against my ribs. Thank you for calling. I've been sitting in my kitchen for 2 hours reading your letter over and over. I have a son. Yes. His name is Devon James Mistral. He's 32, and he's... I paused, unsure how to explain my son to his father. He's tall like you, and he has your eyes. He plays guitar, though he doesn't pursue it professionally. He works in marketing for a tech company in Portland." There was a long silence. Then, "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" The question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. "Because I was 17 and terrified, and I didn't know how to reach you in Los Angeles, because I thought you'd see me as a burden, a complication to your music career. Because I was raised by people who taught me that pregnancy was something girls got themselves into, not something that involved fathers. Eleanor." His voice was gentle but firm. "I loved you. Did you know that? I came back to the motel 2 months later to ask you to come with me to LA. The manager said you'd left without giving a forwarding address." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You came back?" I'd gotten a recording contract. Nothing huge, but enough to support both of us. I had it all planned out. How we'd get you enrolled in night school, how we'd build a life together. I searched for you for months. I sank into the chair behind my shop counter, the sunflowers forgotten. 32 years of wondering, of assuming he'd moved on and forgotten the 17-year-old girl from the motel, and he'd been looking for me. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "We were both kids, Eleanor. But we're not kids now, and apparently we have a grown son who's getting married without knowing I exist. He thinks his stepfather, Colin, is his biological father. I married Colin when Devon was 3, and we never corrected that assumption. And now?" I took a deep breath. "Now Devon has cut me out of his wedding because his fiancée thinks I'm an embarrassment to their perfect image. And I'm tired of being invisible, Lucian. I'm tired of pretending that lies are kinder than truth." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking maybe it's time Devon met his real father." Another long pause. Then, unexpectedly, Lucian laughed. "You want to crash our son's wedding?" "I want to give him the choice to know who he really is. What if he hates us both for disrupting his wedding day? Then at least he'll hate us for the truth instead of loving us for lies." We talked for another hour. He told me about his life, how he'd spent 5 years pursuing music in Los Angeles before realizing he'd rather teach than perform, how he'd moved back to Maine and built a career nurturing young musicians, how he'd married briefly, in his 30s but divorced when they couldn't have children. I always wondered if I had a child somewhere. He admitted, especially after the divorce. There was this emptiness, this sense that I was missing a piece of my own story. I told him about Devon's childhood, about his natural musicality that Colin had discouraged, about the way he'd hum when he was nervous or happy. I described his stubborn streak, his fierce loyalty to people he loved, his tendency to overthink decisions until he paralyzed himself with doubt. "He sounds like me at that age," Lucienne said softly. "He is like you, in all the ways that matter." We arranged to meet the next day at my shop after hours. I spent the rest of Wednesday in a strange state of anticipation and terror. Lo stopped by around closing time and found me reorganizing the cooler for the 3rd time. "You're nervous," she observed. "I'm about to introduce a man to the son he's never met while simultaneously destroying my son's wedding day. Nervous doesn't begin to cover it. What's the worst thing that could happen?" I considered this. Devon never speaks to me again. Lucian decides I'm as irresponsible now as I was at 17. The wedding turns into a disaster that haunts everyone involved for the rest of their lives. And the best thing? Devon finally understands who he really is. He gets to know his biological father. The lies that have shaped his entire life finally stop shaping his future. Lo nodded. Sounds like the best-case scenario outweighs the worst. Does it? I keep thinking about Astrid, about her family, about how humiliating this could be for everyone. "Eleanor," Lo said firmly, "you've spent 32 years protecting everyone except yourself. Maybe it's time to let other people deal with the consequences of their own choices." That night, I pulled out my old photo albums and found pictures of Devon as a child. In one, he was maybe 6 years old, sitting at my kitchen table with a toy guitar, completely absorbed in the make-believe music he was creating. His face had the same expression I'd seen on Lucian's face all those years ago. Pure joy in the act of making melody. I selected a few photos to show Lucian, then realized I should warn Nina about what I was planning. "You're really going to do this?" she asked when I called. "I think I have to." What about Devon's feelings? What about the fact that this is his wedding day? What about the fact that he's marrying someone who thinks his mother is too embarrassing to invite? What about the fact that he's building his life on a lie I was too cowardly to correct? Nina was quiet for a moment. "You know what? You're right. Devon's been acting like Colin's opinions are gospel truth for years. Maybe it's time he learned where he really comes from. Will you be there? At the wedding?" I was invited, but I RSVP'd no because I wasn't going to a wedding that excluded my mother. "But if you're going to be there..." She paused. "Yeah, I'll be there." Someone needs to witness this family reckoning. The next day, dragged by like a slow-motion movie. Every customer who entered my shop seemed to take forever to choose their flowers. Every phone call lasted an eternity. I kept checking the clock, watching the hours crawl toward 5 o'clock, when Lucian would arrive. At exactly 5, the bell above my door chimed, and I looked up to see a man I recognized, despite 32 years of changes. He was silver-haired, now, with lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. But his posture was the same, the way he held his head, the careful grace of his movements. "Eleanor," he said, and my name in his voice brought back a flood of memories I'd spent decades trying to bury. "Hello, Lucian." We stood there for a moment. Two people who'd been young together, now facing the consequences of choices made when the world felt both infinite and impossibly small. "You look good," he said finally. "Different, but good." "You too." I gestured to the chairs I'd arranged near the window. "Would you like some coffee? Tea?" Coffee would be nice. I busied myself with the coffee maker, aware of him watching me, probably trying to reconcile the 17-year-old girl he'd known with the 68-year-old woman I'd become. When I handed him a mug, our fingers brushed, and I felt a shock of recognition that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with shared history. "Tell me about him," Lucienne said. "Tell me about our son." So I did. I showed him the photos I'd selected, told him about Devon's first word, which was ma in a distinctly musical rhythm. His first steps, taken while I was humming. His childhood fears and joys and dreams. I told him about Devon's talent for languages, his gift for bringing people together, his tendency to be harder on himself than anyone else ever was. "He sounds wonderful," Lucienne said, studying a photo of teenage Devon at his high school graduation. "He is wonderful, but he's also been trying to fit himself into Colin's idea of success for so long that I think he's forgotten who he really is." Lucian looked up from the photo. "And you think meeting me will remind him?" "I think meeting you will give him permission to be the person he's always been, underneath the person he thinks he should be." We talked until the sun set behind the lighthouse, planning our approach to the wedding, discussing what we'd say to Devon, preparing for every possible reaction, from joy to fury to complete rejection. "Are you ready for this?" I asked as Lucienne prepared to leave. He smiled, and for a moment I saw the 22-year-old musician who'd promised to come back for me. I've been ready for 32 years. I just didn't know it. After he left, I sat alone in my shop, surrounded by the flowers that had been my refuge for so many years. In 3 days, I would walk into my son's wedding uninvited, accompanied by the father he'd never known existed. I would shatter the carefully constructed reality he'd built his life around, and I had no idea what would be left when the dust settled. But for the first time in 32 years, I felt like I was about to tell the truth instead of protecting. A lie. And that, I thought, might just be worth the risk of losing everything. The morning of Devon's rehearsal dinner, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that felt like swallowed stones. I'd been invited to nothing, included in nothing. But Nina had agreed to text me updates throughout the day. The wedding was tomorrow, and I still hadn't figured out exactly how Lucien and I would make our entrance. I spent the morning in my garden, behind the cottage, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. Physical work had always been my therapy, and today I needed the distraction of dirt under my fingernails and sweat on my forehead. The cosmos were blooming beautifully, their delicate petals a stark contrast to the turmoil in my chest. Around noon, Lucien called. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "Maybe we should reach out to Devon before the wedding. Give him a chance to process this privately instead of ambushing him in front of all his guests." I'd considered this too, but every scenario ended the same way. "He won't see me, Lucien. He's made that clear. And if we call or show up at his hotel, he'll just tell security to keep us away." What if we sent a letter? Something he could read when he's ready. A letter saying, what? "Hi, Devon. Surprise? The man you think is your father isn't actually your father. And your real father is this stranger you've never met. And oh, by the way, your mother has been lying to you for 32 years. I don't think Hallmark makes a card for that." Lucien was quiet for a moment. "You're scared." "Terrified. Me too. But Eleanor, what if this is our only chance? What if we don't show up tomorrow and Devon gets married believing a lie, and then we never get another opportunity? To tell him the truth? He was right, and I knew it. But knowing something and feeling ready for it were different things entirely. "Tell me about your worst fear," I said. "That he'll look at me and see a stranger who abandoned his pregnant mother. That he'll think I'm just some old man trying to insert himself into his life for selfish reasons. And your best hope? That he'll understand why you made the choices you made. That he'll give us both a chance to explain. That maybe..." His voice grew soft. "That maybe I'll finally get to know my son." We agreed to meet at 2 o'clock to visit the wedding venue and figure out logistics. The Cliffside Event Center was a stunning glass building perched on the edge of Meadow Ridge Bay's most dramatic coastline. I'd driven past it hundreds of times but never been inside. It was the kind of place that catered to people with money and impeccable taste. Exactly the sort of venue Astrid would choose. Lucien was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived, leaning against an old blue pickup truck with a guitar case, in the back. He looked nervous but determined, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the gray in his eyes. "Ready for reconnaissance?" he asked. We walked around the building, pretending to be prospective clients interested in booking our own event. The venue coordinator, a polished woman named Jennifer, was happy to give us a tour. The main ceremony space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, natural wood floors, an altar area framed by the endless horizon. "Tomorrow's wedding is going to be absolutely gorgeous," Jennifer gushed. The bride has exquisite taste, very classic, very elegant. What time does the ceremony start? I asked, trying to sound casual. 4 o'clock. Cocktail hour at 5. Dinner at 6:30. It's going to be perfect weather for it, too. As we left, Lucien and I discussed our options. The venue had multiple entrances, including a side door that opened directly into the ceremony space. We could enter during the processional, when everyone's attention would be focused on the bride. Or we could wait until the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? Lucien said. This whole thing is dramatic. We might as well own it. That evening, Nina called with updates from the rehearsal dinner. Mom, it's worse than I thought, she said, her voice tight with anger. Colin made a toast about how proud he is of his son, and how Devon has always been such a credit to the Mistral family name. And Astrid's father gave this speech about how excited they are to welcome Devon into their family, because he comes from good stock and represents their values. What did Devon say? That's the thing. He just sat there, soaking it up. He looked so proud, so pleased to be accepted by these people. And Mom, Astrid made this comment about how glad she is that the wedding will be intimate and tasteful, without any unnecessary drama from extended family. Everyone laughed, but I could tell she was talking about you. I felt anger rise in my chest like a tide. Did anyone defend me? I did. I said something about how families should include the people who actually raised you, not just the people who look good in photos. Astrid got this pinched look on her face, and Devon told me to not make things awkward. After Nina hung up, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow I would either begin to repair my relationship with my son or destroy it completely. There was no middle ground left. Lucien called around 9. I keep thinking about something you said, he told me. About Devon needing to know who he really is before he commits his life to someone else. What about it? I think you're right. I think we're not just giving him information about his father. We're giving him the chance to make choices based on truth instead of lies. And if he chooses to reject us both, then at least he'll be choosing with full knowledge. That's all we can do, Eleanor. Tell the truth and let the people we love decide what to do with it. That night, I laid out my clothes for the wedding. I chose a navy blue dress I'd bought for Nina's college graduation. Simple but elegant, with my mother's pearl necklace as the only accessory. The pearls had been in my family for 3 generations, passed down from mother to daughter as a symbol of feminine strength and endurance. If I was going to confront my son and his wedding guests with 32 years of buried truth, I was going to do it with the grace and dignity of the women who'd come before me. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Devon's face. Sometimes as the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap, sometimes as the distant young man who'd grown ashamed of his mother's lack of sophistication. I wondered which version of my son I'd encounter tomorrow, and whether either of them would be able to forgive me for the choices I'd made when I was younger than he was now. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At dawn, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the birth certificate spread before me one more time. Father. Unknown. In a few hours, that unknown would have a name, a face, a voice. Devon would learn that he came from music and poetry, and dreams deferred, not from Colin's cold pragmatism and calculated ambition. Whether that knowledge would heal him or destroy him remained to be seen. But I was done protecting people from truth. I was done being invisible in my own son's life. Today, Colin Mistral was going to reclaim her voice, even if it cost her everything she'd spent 32 years trying to hold on to. The wedding was in 8 hours, and I was finally ready to tell the truth. The morning of the wedding, Nina sent me a text that changed everything. "Mom, you need to see this." Attached was a screenshot from Astrid's Instagram story, a photo of the bridal suite at the Cliffside Event Center, with Astrid surrounded by her bridesmaids, all of them in matching silk robes. The caption read, "So grateful for a perfect wedding day with only the people who truly matter. No toxic family. New beginnings. Blessed life." The hashtag #WaNoToxicFamily felt like a slap across the face. This wasn't just about excluding me from the wedding. This was about publicly branding me as toxic, as something to be grateful for avoiding. I screenshotted the image and sent it to Lucien with a message. "Still think we should approach this gently?" He called me immediately. "Jesus, Eleanor, she posted that publicly?" 23,000 followers, according to Nina. Apparently, Astrid has quite the social media presence as a political influencer. What kind of person hashtags "no toxic" family on their wedding day? The kind of person who convinced my son that his mother is an embarrassment. I could hear Lucien's anger through the phone, a low rumble that reminded me of distant thunder. Okay, that changes things. If she wants to play this publicly, then maybe our entrance should be more noticeable. What are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe I should bring my guitar. The idea sent a thrill of terror and anticipation through me. You want to announce yourself with music? I want to announce us with truth, and sometimes truth sounds better with a soundtrack. We finalized our plan. Lucien would arrive at the venue first, during the cocktail hour, and position himself near the ceremony space. I would enter just as the processional began, taking a seat in the back row. When the officiant reached the part of the ceremony, asking if anyone had a reason the couple shouldn't be wed, Lucien would step forward with his guitar and ask for the chance to speak to his son. It was dramatic, probably too dramatic, but after seeing Astrid's Instagram post, I felt like the gloves were off. If she wanted to make my exclusion a public spectacle, then my inclusion would be equally spectacular. I spent the morning in a strange state of calm. I cleaned my house, arranged fresh flowers from my garden, and prepared a simple lunch I was too nervous to eat. At 2 o'clock, I began getting ready with the deliberate care of someone preparing for battle. The navy dress fit perfectly, and my mother's pearls caught the light beautifully. I styled my hair in a simple updo and applied makeup with a steady hand. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who had survived 17 years of marriage to a controlling man, raised 2 children mostly alone, built a business from nothing, and was about to reclaim her place in her son's life. I looked like someone who deserved to be at her son's wedding. At 3:30, I drove to the Cliffside Event Center with my heart hammering against my ribs. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, BMWs, Mercedes, Lexuses. I parked my modest Honda between a Tesla and a Range Rover, feeling like an imposter but refusing to be intimidated. The venue was buzzing with activity. Guests in expensive clothes clustered on the outdoor patio, sipping champagne and admiring the ocean view. I could see Colin through the glass doors, holding court with a group of men who looked like they belonged to the same country club. He was grayer than when I'd seen him last, but still carried himself with the same arrogant confidence that had once made me feel safe and later made me feel small. I texted Lucien. "I'm here. Are you in position?" "Guitar and all. You ready for this?" I wasn't sure anyone could ever be ready for something like this, but I was committed. See you on the other side. The processional was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. At 3:55, I made my way to the side entrance Jennifer had shown us during our reconnaissance mission. Through the glass, I could see the ceremony. Space filling with guests, everyone taking their seats, the anticipation building. Devon stood at the altar in a charcoal gray tuxedo, looking handsome and nervous and completely unaware that his world was about to tilt off its axis. He kept checking his watch and smoothing his hair, habits I remembered from his childhood when he was anxious about something. At exactly 4 o'clock, the music began. Pachelbel's canon, played by a string quartet positioned near the windows. The officiant, Reverend Thompson, took his place at the altar. Devon straightened his tie one final time. I slipped through the side door and took a seat in the very back row, behind a large floral arrangement that partially concealed me. From this angle, I could see everything. The guests, the altar, the side door where Lucian was waiting with his guitar. The bridesmaids began their procession down the aisle, each one perfectly coiffed and moving in time with the music. I recognized Nina among them, stunning in a sage-green dress that complemented her auburn hair. She'd agreed to be in the wedding party before she learned I was excluded, and by the time she wanted to drop out, it was too late to do so gracefully. As Nina passed my row, our eyes met for just a moment. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. She was ready for whatever was about to happen. Then the music changed, and everyone rose for the bride. Astrid was undeniably beautiful. Her dress was a masterpiece of beaded silk, her veil a cascade of French lace, her makeup flawless. She moved down the aisle with practiced grace, smiling at the camera phones recording her entrance. Every inch the perfect political wife she was training to become. But as I watched her approach my son, all I could think about was the Instagram post. No toxic family, as if love and sacrifice and 32 years of motherhood could be reduced to a hashtag. Reverend Thompson began the ceremony with traditional words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Devon and Astrid exchanged vows they'd written themselves, full of promises about supporting each other's dreams and building a beautiful future together. The words were lovely, but they felt hollow to me. How could Devon promise to support Astrid's dreams when he'd been taught to suppress his own? How could he commit to building a future when he didn't understand his past? If anyone present has a reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, Reverend Thompson said, his voice carrying clearly through the space. Speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause stretched into silence. This was the moment when guests were supposed to remain quiet, when the ceremony would continue smoothly toward its conclusion. Instead, the side door opened, and Lucian walked in carrying his guitar. A murmur went through the crowd. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Lucian moved with quiet confidence toward the front of the ceremony space, his guitar case slung over his shoulder. He was dressed in a dark suit I hadn't seen before, and he looked every inch the distinguished musician he'd become. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but carrying clearly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something important I need to say to the groom." The murmur became a buzz of confused conversation. Devon's face went white, then red. "Sir, I think you're confused. This is a private ceremony. I know exactly where I am," Lucien said. "My name is Lucien Rayner, and I'm your biological father." The words dropped into the elegant ceremony like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through the entire room. Gasps, whispers, the sound of someone's champagne glass hitting the floor. Devon stared at Lucien with his mouth open. "That's impossible! My father is Colin Mistral. Colin Mistral is your stepfather. I said, standing up from my seat in the back row. And apparently, it's time you learn the truth. Every head in the room turned toward me. I could see Colin's face, purple with rage. Astrid looked like she was about to faint. Nina was smiling despite herself. And Devon looked like someone had just told him the earth was actually flat and the sky was actually green. "Mom," he whispered. "What are you doing here?" I walked down the aisle toward my son, toward the altar where he stood frozen in shock, toward the truth that had been waiting 32 years to be spoken. "I'm being your mother," I said, the way I should have been all along. The silence in the ceremony space was deafening. 200 wedding guests sat frozen, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips, their cameras forgotten, their eyes darting between me, Lucian, and Devon like spectators at a tennis match. Nobody wanted to watch. Devon's face cycled through emotions faster than I could track them. Confusion, anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been relief, though I could have been imagining. That last one. "This is insane," Astrid said, her voice high and tight. "This is our wedding day. Whatever family drama you people have, it can wait until—" "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "It can't wait. It's waited 32 years already." Reverend Thompson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to—" "No recess," Lucien said. He was standing about 10 feet from the altar now, his guitar case still slung over his shoulder. "Devon, I know this is overwhelming, but your mother is right. You deserve to know the truth before you make the biggest commitment of your life." "The truth about what?" Devon's voice cracked like a teenager's. "Colin Mistral is my father. He raised me. He adopted me. He adopted you when you were 3 years old," I said. "But he didn't create you. Lucian did." I could see Colin, rising from his seat in the front row, his face the color of a ripe tomato. "Eleanor, this is completely inappropriate. You're having some kind of breakdown, and you need to leave immediately. Before— Sit down, Colin." The words came out of me with more authority than I'd ever used with him during our 15-year marriage. "For once in your life, just sit down and let someone else tell the truth." He actually sat down, which shocked me almost as much as my own boldness. Nina stepped forward from her position with the bridesmaids. "Devon, maybe you should listen to what they have to say." "Nina, you knew about this?" Devon's voice was rising now, drawing curious looks from the catering staff who were peeking through the kitchen doors. "I found out 3 days ago, and I think Mom should have told you years ago, but I also think it's not too late to hear her out." Astrid grabbed Devon's arm. "We are not doing this. Not here. Not now. Not in front of everyone we know. This is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and your mother is trying to ruin it with some ridiculous story about—" "It's not a story," Lucien said quietly. He unzipped his guitar case and pulled out a beautiful acoustic guitar, worn smooth by years of playing. "May I?" Without waiting for an answer, he began to play. The melody was soft and haunting, a jazz standard I recognized from the radio but couldn't name. His fingers moved across the strings with the same grace I remembered. And suddenly, I was 17 again, sitting on a motel bed listening to him play songs that made me believe in magic. "This is the song I was playing the night I met your mother," Lucien said, still playing, his eyes on Devon. "July 15th, 1973. She was working the night shift at the Seahorse Motel, and I was staying there while I waited for a call from a record producer in Los Angeles." The music continued, weaving through his words like a soundtrack to memory. She was 17, the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen, and she was humming along to this song before she even realized she was doing it. That's when I knew she had music in her soul. Devon's eyes were fixed on Lucien's hands, watching the way they moved across the guitar strings. I could see recognition dawning on his face. The same unconscious grace, the same natural rhythm that he'd inherited along with his father's storm cloud eyes. We spent 3 weeks together, Lucien continued, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the silent room. And when I left for LA, I promised to come back for her. I got my recording contract and I did come back, 2 months later, but she was gone. He stopped playing and looked directly at me. I searched for her for months. I hired a private investigator. I placed ads in newspapers across 3 states. I never stopped wondering what happened to the girl who hummed jazz standards and made me believe I could be better than I was. "This is ridiculous," Astrid said, but her voice lacked conviction now. Even she could feel the truth in Lucien's words, in the way Devon was staring at his father's hands like he was seeing his own future. "I was pregnant," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I was 17 and terrified, and I didn't know how to reach you. So I ran." Devon finally spoke. "You ran?" "I went to Portland. I lived in a women's shelter until you were born. Then I worked whatever jobs I could find to support us. When you were 3, I met Colin, and he offered us stability, a father for you, a husband for me, a chance at a normal life." "So you lied to me about who my father was?" The accusation hung, in the air like incense, heavy and inescapable. "I told you the story I thought would hurt you least. I thought telling you that your father had died was kinder than telling you that I was too scared to let him choose you." "Choose me?" "Choose us," I corrected. "Choose to be a father when he was only 22 years old, with a music career just starting. I was protecting him as much as I was protecting you." Lucien stepped closer to Devon. "Son, I would have chosen you. I would have chosen both of you without hesitation. I spent 32 years wondering if I had a child somewhere in the world, if I'd missed the chance to be a father." Devon looked back and forth between us, his face a mask of confusion and anger, and something that might have been hope. "Why now? Why tell me this now, today, in front of everyone?" "Because you didn't invite me to your wedding," I said simply. "Because the woman you're marrying posted on Instagram that she was grateful for a wedding without toxic family. Because I realized that if I stayed silent any longer, you might spend your whole life believing you're someone you're not." I could hear murmurs from the guests now, phones being discreetly pulled out to record what was happening. This would be all over social media within hours, I realized. Astrid's perfect political wedding turned into a public family drama. "Devon," Astrid said urgently, "we don't have to deal with this now. We can get married first, and then you can sort out whatever this is afterward, privately." But Devon wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at Lucien's guitar, at the way his father held it like an extension of himself. "You play jazz," Devon said. "I do. I love jazz. I've always loved jazz, even though—" He glanced at Colin. "Even though I was told it wasn't practical." "Your biological father was never practical," Colin said from his seat, his voice dripping with disdain. "That's exactly why Eleanor came to me. She needed someone stable, someone who could provide for a family, someone who understood responsibility, someone who could control us." I shot back. "Someone who made us feel grateful for scraps of attention and affection. The truth was spilling out now like water from a broken dam. 32 years of carefully maintained politeness and gratitude, washed away by the sheer relief of finally speaking honestly. You controlled everything, I continued, my voice growing stronger. What Devon wore, what activities he could pursue, what kind of music was acceptable in our house. You made him feel guilty for loving anything that didn't serve your idea of success. I gave him every advantage, Colin protested. Private school, college tuition, career connections. You gave him a prison, Nina said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her, this youngest voice speaking truth to power. You made him feel like his own interests and talents were weaknesses to overcome instead of gifts to celebrate. Devon was staring at his hands now, and I knew he was thinking about all the times he'd hidden his guitar playing, all the times he'd felt ashamed of the music that lived in his heart. Play something, he said to Lucian. What would you like to hear? Something you wrote. Lucien's fingers found the strings again, and this time the melody was different, sadder, more complex, full of longing and regret and hope. It was the sound of 32 years of missing someone, of wondering what if, of love that had never been allowed to grow. I wrote this after I came back to the motel and found out you were gone, he told me. But his eyes were on Devon. I called it Eleanor's song. I've been playing it for 32 years, never knowing I was singing about my son's mother. Devon closed his eyes and listened, and I could see his whole body responding to the music, like a tuning fork vibrating, in sympathy. This was his inheritance, I realized, not Colin's calculated ambition or Astrid's polished perfection, but this, the ability to hear beauty and respond to it with his whole being. When the song ended, the silence was different, softer somehow, full of possibility instead of shock. I have so many questions, Devon said finally. We have time for answers, Lucian replied. We have the rest of our lives for answers. Astrid stepped forward, her face pale but determined. Devon, I need you to decide right now. Are you going to marry me today? Or are you going to let these people destroy our wedding with their family drama? The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. In that moment, I saw everything clearly. The choice Devon was being asked to make between the life he'd built on lies and the truth that might set him free. I held my breath and waited to see which version of my son would answer. Devon looked at Astrid for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with 32 years of conditioning. Be practical. Don't make waves. Don't embarrass the family. Choose stability over truth, appearance over authenticity. Then he looked at Lucien's guitar, and something shifted in his expression. Can you teach me that song? He asked his father. Devon, Astrid said sharply. We have 200 guests waiting for us to get married. The photographer, the caterer, Can you teach me that song? Devon repeated louder this time. Lucian smiled, and I saw Devon's smile reflected back at him across 32 years of separation. I can teach you 100 songs. I can teach you everything I know about music if you want to learn. I do want to learn. I've always wanted to learn, but I thought... He glanced at Colin again. I thought wanting music made me weak. Music doesn't make you weak, Lucian said gently. Music makes you human. Devon turned to face the wedding. Guests, most of whom were still sitting in stunned silence, their phones recording every word. I'm sorry, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I know this isn't what anyone expected, But I need to understand who I am before I can promise to be someone's husband. The words hit Astrid like a physical blow. You're choosing them over me on our wedding day. I'm choosing truth over lies. There's a difference. This is humiliating, she said, her voice rising to a pitch that made several guests wince. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to my father's campaign? To our reputation? To our future? Devon was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was sad but certain. Astrid, if your love for me depends on me being ashamed of my mother and cutting my biological father out of my life before I even get to know him, then maybe we don't have the kind of future worth building. The words hung in the air like a bell that had been struck, reverberating through the ceremony space and into the hearts of everyone present. I felt tears I hadn't expected sliding down my cheeks, and when I looked at Lucian, I saw that his eyes were bright with moisture too. Our son was choosing truth. Fine, Astrid said, her voice cold as winter ocean. But when you realize what a mistake this is, don't come crawling back to me. I won't be waiting. She turned on her heel and stalked down the aisle, her expensive wedding dress rustling like angry leaves. Her bridesmaids scrambled after her, except for Nina, who stayed put with a small smile on her face. Well, Reverend Thompson said into the awkward silence that followed. This is certainly a first in my 40 years of performing weddings. Some of the guests began to murmur and shift in their seats, clearly unsure whether they should leave or stay to see what happened next. Colin stood up again, his face purple with rage. Devon, you're making the biggest mistake of your life, he said. Astrid comes from a good family, a powerful family. She could have opened doors for you, given you the kind of connections that build careers. And you're throwing it all away for what? Some fantasy about having a musician for a father. I'm not throwing anything away, Devon said. I'm picking up something I didn't know I'd lost. He walked over to where Lucian stood and held out his hand. Hello, Dad. I'm Devon. I'm sorry it took me 32 years to meet you. Lucian set down his guitar and pulled Devon into a hug that made my heart clench with joy and regret in equal measure. Father and son, finally together, both of them crying now and not caring who saw. I'm sorry, too, Lucian whispered. I'm sorry I wasn't there for your first word, your first steps, your first day of school. I'm sorry I wasn't there to teach you guitar when you were small, to tell you that loving music was a gift, not a weakness. You're here now, Devon said. That's what matters. I stood at the back of the ceremony space, watching my son meet his father, feeling like my heart might burst from the sheer relief of finally telling the truth. 32 years of lies, unraveled in 30 minutes, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. Nina appeared at my elbow. Mom, are you okay? I'm better than okay, I said. I'm free. Colin stormed over to where we stood, his face twisted with an anger I remembered too well from our marriage. Eleanor, you've outdone yourself this time. You've destroyed your son's future. Embarrassed him in front of everyone he knows. And for what? Some romantic notion about his biological father? I gave him the truth, Colin. Something you never did. I gave him stability. I gave him opportunities. I gave him a name worth having. You gave him shame about who he really was. You made him feel like his own nature was something to overcome instead of something to celebrate. His nature? Colin laughed, but there was no humor in it. His nature is to be impractical, undisciplined, unrealistic about how the world works. Just like his mother. The insult hit me like it always had, but this time I didn't absorb it. This time I let it bounce off me like light off water. "You're right," I said. "Devon is like me. He's loyal and artistic and willing to sacrifice for people he loves. He feels things deeply and he believes in beauty, and he has the courage to choose love over convenience. And if you think those are weaknesses, then you never deserved to be his father anyway." Colin stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. Maybe this was the first time in 32 years I'd stood up to him, without apologizing immediately afterward. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "Both of you will regret this." He turned and stalked out of the ceremony space, leaving behind the wreckage of his carefully constructed narrative about our family. Meanwhile, Devon and Lucian were still talking, their heads bent together like conspirators sharing secrets. I could see Devon's hands moving as he spoke, the same gestures Lucian made when he was explaining something about music. Genetics, I thought. The things that can't be taught or untaught, only expressed or suppressed. "Mom," Devon called, looking up from his conversation with Lucian. "Come here." I walked toward my son and his father, these two men who shared DNA and a love of music and 32 years of missing each other. When I reached them, Devon pulled me into their embrace, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged somewhere completely. "I'm sorry," Devon whispered into my hair. "I'm sorry I believed Colin's version of who you were, instead of trusting what I knew in my heart. I'm sorry I let Astrid convince me you were toxic, when really you were just inconvenient to her perfect image." "You don't need to apologize," I said. "I'm the one who should apologize. I should have told you the truth years ago. I should have fought harder for our relationship instead of accepting Colin's judgment that I wasn't good enough." "We were both protecting ourselves," Devon said. "But we don't have to do that anymore." Lucian cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt this family reunion, but we have about 150 very confused wedding guests who probably don't know what to do with themselves." It was true. Most of the guests were still sitting in their seats, alternately staring at us and checking their phones, clearly unsure of the protocol for a wedding that had turned into a family revelation. "What do you want to do?" I asked Devon. He looked around at the beautiful ceremony space, at the flowers and the candles and the string quartet, who were still sitting with their instruments at the ready. Then he looked at Lucien's guitar. "I want to hear you play," he said to his father. "I want to hear all the songs you wrote while you were missing me." "Here? Now? In front of everyone?" "Especially in front of everyone. For 32 years, Colin made me feel like music was something to be ashamed of. I want everyone to hear what I inherited from my real father." Lucien picked up his guitar again, and his fingers found the strings like they were coming home. "Any requests?" "Play something hopeful," Devon said. "Play something about new beginnings." So Lucien played, and his music filled the ceremony space like sunlight after a storm. Some of the guests began to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional honesty of what they were witnessing. But others stayed, drawn by the beauty of the music and the raw authenticity of what was happening. Nina sat down in the front row and started clapping along with the rhythm. Then some of the other guests joined in, until there was a small group of people celebrating the music instead of judging the circumstances that had brought it into being. And in the middle of it all, my son stood with his father, learning the songs he'd been denied for 32 years, finally discovering the melody of his own inheritance. 3 months later, I was arranging flowers in my shop when I heard the sound of guitar music drifting through the open window. Devon had been taking lessons with Lucian every Saturday morning since the wedding that wasn't, and their practice sessions had become the soundtrack to my weekends. I walked outside to where they sat on my front porch, father and son bent over, their instruments, working through a jazz standard I recognized but couldn't name. Devon's playing had improved dramatically in just 12 weeks, his natural talent finally given the guidance it had always needed. "That sounded beautiful," I said when they finished the song. "We're getting ready for the open mic night at Morrison's pub," Devon told me, his face bright with excitement. "Lucienne thinks I'm ready to perform in public." "More than ready," Lucienne said, pride evident in his voice. "You have better instincts than students I've taught for years." I settled into the porch swing I'd bought the month before, watching these two men who had missed so much of each other's lives, but were making up for lost time with an intensity that took my breath away. Devon had moved back to Metteridge, Bay temporarily, renting a small apartment above the bookstore, while he figured out what he wanted to do with his career. The marketing job in Portland had felt increasingly meaningless after the wedding revelations, and he was exploring options that would let him combine his business skills with his newfound musical passion. "How's the job search going?" I asked. "Actually, I had an interesting conversation with Jennifer from the event center yesterday," Devon said. "She's been thinking about expanding into music venues, maybe hosting intimate concerts along with weddings and corporate events. She asked if I'd be interested in consulting on the project. That sounds perfect for you." "It feels perfect," he agreed. "Like I'm finally doing something that uses all of who I am, instead of just the parts Colin approved of." The mention of Colin still stung sometimes. He'd made no effort to repair his relationship with Devon after the wedding disaster, instead treating the whole situation like a temporary rebellion that would eventually be corrected. Devon had tried calling him twice, hoping to find some middle ground. But Colin had refused to acknowledge Lucien's existence or Devon's right to explore his musical heritage. "Some people can't handle it when the stories they've built their lives around turn out to be incomplete," Lucienne had said after Devon's last unsuccessful attempt at reconciliation with his stepfather. "That doesn't mean the stories weren't useful at the time, or that Colin doesn't love you in his own way. It just means he's not ready to expand his understanding of who you are." Devon had accepted this with more grace than I would have managed at his age. 32 years of believing Colin was his father didn't disappear overnight, but the knowledge of his true paternity had recontextualized everything. The artistic impulses he'd learned to suppress, the way music made him feel more like himself than any career achievement ever had, the restlessness he'd felt in Astrid's world of political connections and social climbing. It all made sense now. "I keep thinking about something," Devon said, setting down his guitar. "About how different my childhood would have been if I'd known about Lucian from the beginning." "Different how?" I asked, though I suspected I knew what he meant. I spent so much energy trying to be the son Colin wanted, practical, ambitious, focused on material success, and I was never really good at it, which made me feel like I was failing at being myself. "You weren't failing," Lucienne said gently. "You were just trying to grow in soil that wasn't meant for your particular seeds." It was a beautiful metaphor, and painfully accurate. I thought about all the times Devon had come home from school, excited about a music class or a creative writing assignment, only to have Colin redirect his enthusiasm toward more useful subjects. How many conversations had started with, "That's nice, but you need to focus on math and science if you want to get into a good college." "I'm not angry anymore," Devon continued. "At least, not as angry as I was. I understand why you made the choices you did, Mom. You were 17 and scared, and you thought you were protecting me. I was protecting myself, too, I admitted. I was protecting myself from having to be brave enough to track down your father and tell him the truth. And I was protecting myself from having to admit that Colin's version of success never felt like success to me. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the ocean in the distance, and the wind chimes Lucian had hung from my porch eaves. They were tuned to a pentatonic scale, he'd told me, so they always made harmonious music no matter how the wind blew them. "Have you heard from Astrid?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Devon nodded. "She sent me a text last week. She's engaged to a state representative's son. The wedding's planned for next spring." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, mostly, and a little sad for her. She's going to get exactly the kind of marriage she wanted. Politically advantageous, socially prestigious, completely predictable. But I don't think she's going to get the kind of love that makes you want to throw away your wedding day to chase after truth." Lucienne smiled. "That's very poetic. You should write songs." "I've been thinking about that, actually. About writing songs about all of this. Finding out who my father was. Learning to choose authenticity over convenience. Discovering that family is something you create as much as something you inherit. I'd love to help you with that," Lucienne said. "We could collaborate." The idea of my son and his father creating music together, building something beautiful from the ashes of 32 years of separation, made my heart feel so full, I thought it might burst. Nina's car pulled into my driveway, interrupting my reverie. She'd driven up from Portland for our monthly family dinner, a tradition we'd started after the wedding that wasn't. She got out of the car carrying a bottle of wine and a guitar case. "Don't tell me you're learning to play too," Devon called to her. "Lucian's been giving me lessons over video chat," she said, grinning. "Apparently musical talent runs in the family." "All kinds of talent run in this family," I said, looking around at these 3 people who had become my world. Musical talent, artistic talent, the talent for truth-telling, the talent for forgiveness, the talent for stubborn determination. Lucian added, giving me a meaningful look. "The talent for dramatic gesture," Nina said, laughing. "Mom, you literally crashed a wedding to introduce Devon to his biological father. That's going to be a family legend for generations." "It's going to be an embarrassing family legend for generations," I corrected. "The best family legends are embarrassing," Devon said. "That's what makes them memorable." As the afternoon wore on, we moved inside for dinner. I'd made pot roast with vegetables from my garden, and Lucian had brought homemade bread that was somehow even better than the ones from Chen's bakery. We ate and talked and laughed, and periodically someone would pick up a guitar and play something, so our conversation was woven through with music like thread through fabric. After dinner, Devon pulled out his phone and showed us photos from his apartment. He'd hung my grandfather's old violin on the wall, along with some sheet music Lucienne had given him, and a framed copy of his original birth certificate. The one that said, "Father Unknown." "I like having it up there," he said when I raised an eyebrow at the document choice. "It reminds me that unknowns can be solved, that it's never too late to find missing pieces of yourself. Even when finding those pieces means admitting you've been living a lie?" I asked. "Especially then. The lie was comfortable, but it was still a lie. And comfort that comes from denying parts of yourself isn't really comfort at all. It's just a very pretty prison." As the evening wound down and Nina prepared to drive back, To Portland, she pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about Dad." For a moment, I thought she meant Colin, but then I realized she was talking about her own father. Colin was her biological father, even if he'd been an emotionally distant and controlling parent to both his children. "What about him?" "I think I understand now why you stayed married to him for so long, even when you were unhappy. You thought you were protecting Devon and me, giving us stability and a father figure. I was trying to do what was best for both of you. I know. But Mom, you taught me something important by finally standing up to him at the wedding. You taught me that sometimes protecting other people from truth isn't actually protecting them at all. It's just enabling lies that hurt everyone involved." Her words hit me with surprising force. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've been doing the same thing with my own relationship. I've been staying with someone who makes me feel small, because I thought stability was more important than happiness. But watching you choose truth over comfort made me realize that I deserve better, Nina. I broke up with Marcus last week, and I'm scared, but I'm also excited to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be the person someone else wants me to be." I pulled my daughter into a hug, feeling proud and terrified for her in equal measure. "How do you feel?" "Free," she said. "Terrified and free." It was the same way I'd felt the day I confronted Devon at his wedding, the same way I felt now when I looked at the life I was building from the truth, instead of the lie I'd maintained for 32 years. After Nina left and Lucien went home to his own house, though he'd been staying later and later each evening, and I'd been hoping he might stay over soon, Devon lingered on my porch. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to tell me the truth, even when it was 32 years too late. For showing up at my wedding even though I didn't invite you. For refusing to let me marry someone who wanted me to be ashamed of my own mother." "You would have figured it out eventually," I said. "You're too smart and too authentic to have stayed in that situation forever." "Maybe. But I might have figured it out after kids, after years of building a life on a foundation that was never solid. You saved me from that." We sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the wind chimes and the distant ocean and the sound of our own breathing. 3 months ago, I'd thought I'd lost my son forever. Now I understood that I'd never actually had him to lose. Not the real him, anyway. I'd had the version of him that tried to fit into Colin's expectations and Astrid's image of perfection. But this Devon, the one who played guitar and wrote songs and chose truth over convenience, this Devon was worth waiting 32 years to meet. "I love you," I told him. "I love you too, Mom. All of you. Even the parts that make dramatic scenes. At weddings. Especially those parts," I said, and we both laughed. Later that night, alone in my cottage, I took out the pressed rose I'd kept from 1973 and placed it on my kitchen table next to a photo from Devon's almost wedding. The moment when he and Lucien first embraced, father and son finally together, after 3 decades of separation. Tomorrow, Devon and Lucien would go to their first open mic night together. Next week, Nina would start the new job she'd found in Portland, one that paid less than her old position, but made her excited to go to work each morning. Next month, Lucien and I would have dinner together to celebrate what would have been our 33rd anniversary if we'd never been separated. And someday, maybe not too far in the future, I would plan a wedding for my son. One where his real father walked him down the aisle, where his mother sat in the front row without having to crash the ceremony, where the guest list included everyone who truly loved him instead of everyone who looked good in photographs. But for now, It was enough to sit in my kitchen surrounded by the flowers I'd arranged that morning, listening to the ocean and thinking about the courage it takes to choose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, love over fear. Outside my window, Meadow Bay slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, unaware that one woman's world had cracked open and rearranged itself around the simple, revolutionary act of finally telling the truth. The autumn leaves had turned to fire in Meadow Bay, carpeting the streets in rust and gold. 3 months had passed since the wedding. That wasn't. But the reverberations still stirred quietly beneath everyday life. Eleanor adjusted the angle of the ceramic wind chime by the flower shop's front door. A gift from Lucian that chimed in perfect fifths when the coastal breeze passed through. Business had picked up, in part due to curious locals who'd followed the viral video of the wedding reveal. Tourists now wandered into Meadowridge Flowers asking, "Is this the shop run by the woman from the guitar wedding?" She always smiled, nodded and answered gently, "Yes, that was me." But beneath the notoriety, Eleanor's world had grown quieter, more honest. Gone were the tense, uncertain silences that had once dominated her thoughts. She no longer had to rehearse conversations. With Devon in her mind, now they spoke nearly every day. He had moved into a modest apartment in town, above the old music store no less, and started teaching beginner jazz guitar lessons in the evenings. Word of mouth spread quickly. Meadowridge parents wanted their kids to learn from the wedding guy, and Devon, much to his own surprise, found peace in this new rhythm. One Thursday evening, Eleanor stopped by Devon's studio after closing the shop. She brought fresh dahlias, Lucian's favorite, and a tin of the ginger snaps he adored. The walls of the studio were lined with sound panels and framed sheet music. But most notably, one corner displayed a large photo of Devon, Lucian, and Eleanor, taken by Nina during an impromptu porch concert. "You're early," Devon said, strumming gently. "I brought cookies. Your father's in the mood for swing today, I hear." "Isn't he always?" Lucien entered moments later, his smile easy and warm. He kissed Eleanor softly, then took his place beside Devon, tuning his guitar. Their session began with standards: Autumn Leaves, Blue Monk, My Funny Valentine. But midway through, Devon surprised them with something new. "I wrote this last night," he said. "It's called Second Chances." As he played, Eleanor closed her eyes. The music carried notes of sorrow, joy, forgiveness. When he finished, Lucien's eyes were damp. "You wrote that?" he asked. Devon nodded. "It's about you. About Mom. About me. Finally becoming who I should have always been." Lucien put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then it's the most honest song I've ever heard." They played it again, together, this time. And Eleanor, sitting with her tea and cookies, realized this room, this music, this family built from risk and revelation, was the true wedding day she'd been waiting for. The vows weren't spoken. They were played. 1 year later, the Cliffside Event Center was once again dressed in white and gold, but this time the seats were filled with friends who knew the whole truth and loved them anyway. Devon and Nina had planned the event together. A celebration of family was what they called it. Not a redo of the first wedding. Not an apology. A renewal. A beginning. Astrid was a distant memory now, replaced by a quieter presence in Devon's life. Camille, a music therapist from Portland, who had seen the wedding video and written Devon a letter afterward. It wasn't romantic at first. Just a thank you for reminding her that music could heal more than wounds. But healing is where love grows best. Camille stood beside Devon now, barefoot on the altar platform, both of them adorned in ivy crowns, made by Eleanor herself. Instead of tuxedos and designer gowns, guests wore linen, floral prints, and canvas shoes. Instead of champagne, they toasted with homemade cider. Instead of a string quartet, Lucian played solo. When the vows began, Devon took Eleanor's hand and led her forward. "There's someone else I need to honor today," he said to the gathered crowd. "My mother, who once lied to protect me and then told the truth to save me. Mom, I wouldn't be standing here without your courage." The crowd applauded, some wiping tears. Eleanor could barely keep her hands from shaking as she embraced him. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "You gave me back more than I ever lost." When Lucian played Second Chances, as the couple danced barefoot under the twinkle lights, Camille rested her head on Devon's shoulder and whispered, "You really are your father's son." "And my mother's," he said, smiling. Later, as the sun dipped into the ocean and the guests toasted s'mores by the bonfire, Eleanor sat with Lucian by the edge of the dunes. He reached into his coat and handed her something. It was a new pressed rose. "I saved it," he said. "From that first motel garden, the one I gave you back then. It was only half of the story. This is the rest." Eleanor pressed it too, her lips. "Do you think Devon knows just how rare it is, what we've built?" "He will," Lucienne said. "The first time he has to tell a hard truth and doesn't flinch." A year ago, Eleanor had walked into her son's wedding uninvited, afraid and armed with truth. Today she was seated at the front, hands held, in love, watching him begin a new life with eyes wide open. The truth hadn't just broken them, it had set them all free. In the weeks after Devon and Camille's barefoot wedding, life in Meadoridge Bay settled into a rhythm of small, meaningful moments. The first Sunday morning after the ceremony, Eleanor rose early and walked along the shoreline, barefoot like her son had been when he exchanged vows. The tide was low, and the sky hung with soft grey clouds that promised rain later. In her hand she carried a letter, one she'd written to herself the week before the wedding, but never mailed. It was an apology, and a thank you, and a permission slip. "You're not broken for making the safest choice once. You're not selfish for choosing the truth now. You are not late. You are finally on time." She folded the letter carefully, tucked it beneath a driftwood log, and let the sea wind carry it off her shoulders. Back at the shop, things had changed in small but undeniable ways. Tourists still trickled in hoping to glimpse the woman from the wedding reveal. But more often customers came in asking for the Eleanor mix, bouquets that told stories, flowers with meaning. She'd begun naming arrangements after songs Devon and Lucian played. Blue in Bloom, Father's Melody, The Invitation. Each told a story in petals and stems. Even Mrs. Chen next door had started keeping one of Eleanor's creations in her bakery display, calling it the Truth Rose. One Monday afternoon, Devon walked into the shop with Camille, both carrying folders. "You're about to be even busier," Devon said. "Camille and I are co-hosting a community music and art series, one weekend a month. We're calling it Open Hands. Music, spoken word, flower design, small makers," Camille added. "And we want the launch party to be here, in your garden." Eleanor blinked. "My garden? Are you sure it's big enough?" "We're sure it's meaningful enough," Camille said. Devon said this is where he first learned who he was. So it began. By early spring, Open Hands was the talk of the coast. Musicians from nearby towns came to share original songs. Retired artists taught children how to shape clay. Poets read under strings of lights while Eleanor's arrangements adorned every table. The events weren't huge, but they were transformative. Lucien played the closing song every time, and every time he played Second Chances, now officially Devon's signature tune, and soon to be the name of his first EP. Yes, Devon was recording. With Lucien's help, Nina's business advice, and Camille's quiet encouragement, Devon had begun recording 5 original songs in a home studio above the music shop. They were rough, raw, and beautiful. "You don't need to be famous," Lucien told him. "You just need to be heard." Devon smiled. Isn't that what all of us are trying to be? A year after the wedding reveal, Eleanor finally sat down to write to Colin. Not to rekindle anything. There was no fire left to revive, but to finally speak the words she'd never said out loud. You were right about some things. Devon did need structure. But what he needed more was acceptance, the kind that doesn't shame someone for being different from you. I stayed silent for years because I was afraid of the consequences of truth. You capitalized on that fear. But I'm not afraid anymore. I don't need you to apologize. I only need you to understand that the truth didn't break Devon. It freed him. Goodbye. She never sent the letter, but writing it was enough. That same week, she received a message from someone she hadn't thought of in years. Astrid. The message was brief, polite, cold, yet thoughtful in its own way. Devon seems to be doing well. I wanted to say that while the wedding was a painful experience, I've come to realize I needed it. I was chasing a life that wasn't really mine. I'm marrying someone now who knows everything about me, and I wish you peace. Eleanor responded with just one line. The truth hurts, but it never wounds as deeply as pretending. She never heard from Astrid again, but didn't need to. By summer, Camille was 6 months pregnant. They'd told Eleanor, on a rainy afternoon in the shop, sitting by the open window, with chamomile tea and the sound of guitar strings drifting through the walls. I didn't know I could be this happy, Devon had said. I didn't know life could feel this full. Eleanor remembered touching Camille's hand, then Devon's, and saying, You're starting a story the right way, with honesty. That's more than I could say at the beginning of mine. When the baby was born, a girl named Lark Eleanor Rayner, Devon asked his mother to be in the first family portrait. The photo was taken in the garden. Lucien held Lark in his arms, Devon's guitar slung over one shoulder, and Camille laughing, softly with her head tilted back. Eleanor stood just behind them, hands resting on Devon's shoulders, her eyes full of something deeper than pride, something earned, a kind of joy that only comes when truth is finally allowed to take root and bloom. Behind them, in full late summer bloom, stood the trellis Eleanor had built herself years earlier. This time, it was draped in climbing roses, Lucien's favorite, the ones she used to press and hide in silence. Now they stood tall. In every photo taken that day, the roses were in the frame, and in every heart that had once broken, hers, Lucien's, Devon's, something had grown in their place, something real. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.